Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. My name's Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by Gail Schimmel.
Hi Fiona.
Gail, how has your writing week been?
So it's been interesting because I have been doing a project for friends, 3 friends, I'm one of the 4, 3 friends where we write a chapter of a book and we suddenly, and this is how it happens when you do a group writing project, suddenly and unexpectedly you're at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. And because you haven't been writing it all yourself, that it sneaks up on you. And suddenly we were at the end of the book, and the end of the book only came to us maybe a cycle of writing before the end of the book. And it felt to me, because of the way things turned out, to write the last chapter and epilogue. Mm-hmm. And a prologue. Mm-hmm. So I've had a busy week writing all these things, my last chapter, the prologue and the epilogue. And it's been fun because it's been bringing that book together. I mean, it needs a lot of editing, a lot of work when 4 people write and all of you have slightly different ideas of where the plot's going to go. There are so many dangling plot ends, but luckily one of my co-writers is taking that on. But so it's been quite a fun week of writing those chapters, 2 weeks actually, of writing those chapters and bringing that book to finality.
And are you having to go back and read what everyone's written so that you can sort of frame it in that way?
So I had to read the end part of the book where the greater part of the action is because that final chapter had to bring all those little pieces of what happened on the night in question together. I had to slightly change some of the things that happened on the night in question and bring it all together. But I haven't read the whole book again. Connie's going to do that.
And one last question about this. When you are the person who's kind of going back and sweeping up and doing a prologue and an epilogue, how much autonomy do you feel to change things, or do you have to consult every step of the way?
It's a funny one. And I basically said, listen, I'm going to have to be a bit harsh. I'm going to have to change some things because some of you have written nonsense. And I've tried to do it as little as possible. Just what I needed to make that end work. But Conita is going to do an edit where she goes, get rid of this plot, write more here, you're in the wrong. I wrote a chapter, the whole book's in 3rd person, I wrote a chapter in 1st person. So sort out your point of view, sort out your tense. She's going to do the hard and strict edit. Mm-hmm. And we have all said, go for it, tear us apart. I think you have to. The only way a group writing project is going to be readable in the end is if you're quite thick-skinned and harsh with each other.
Fascinating. I'm so interested to read the final product of this.
Let's hope we get a final product that can be read. What about you, Fiona? What have you been up to?
Well, I've had to do a thing that is so unexpectedly hard that I'm struggling with it every day. And it's a piece of advice that I think we've given in the past, and that's also probably been given to us in the past, which is you've got a completed manuscript, you're not happy with it, you're not completely sure what's wrong or how to fix it, and you have to put it away in a drawer for quite a long time. And it's honestly been one of the hardest things I've ever had to do because I am itching to go back and fix it.
Interesting.
From the moment I realized fully that this is not working, I've thought, okay, well, let me add it. I'll fix it. Yeah. I'll fix it immediately. I can do it. I know what's wrong. I'll go in and fix it. And every day I've got a new idea of how to fix it. And as the days are turning into weeks, I'm realizing that my first idea on how to fix it is not the same as my current idea on how to fix it. And that maybe this process of just letting it sit for a while will actually have value. But oh my gosh, it's so hard. I'm struggling to think about anything else, to concentrate on anything else. This is really, really difficult for me.
And how long are you making yourself do this for?
Well, I was advised, several weeks at least, if you can manage it a couple of months. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage it.
I also do think that if every day you're circling around the same way to fix it now, and you are so hungry to do it, maybe that does mean you are ready, that you've left it for long enough. Just putting it out there.
I know. This is what my lizard brain has been telling me all along. Come on, you can do it. Go and fix it. You don't need to wait. But No, I'm not circling back to the same place all the time. I'm jumping around to different places and different ideas. So I think I'm going to have to do the very, very hard thing and just leave it a bit longer. But I'll keep you updated. I'll let you know when I get back to it.
I'm very interested. And what have you been reading, consuming while you do all this waiting?
Well, I wanted to give you an update on War and Peace, which I told you that my son and I are reading. And we are not yet finished, but we've only got about 200 pages to go.
Only 200 pages.
So that means we've already read about 1,000 pages. And it's just such a good book. I can see why it is considered to be one of the great books of the world. And yes, there are parts of it that drag, where he's really wrestling with the idea of what it means to be at war and how this particular war came into being. Those bits are possibly ones a bit tempted to skim there. But for the rest of it, it's such a good story. He's only got probably only about 3 sets of characters representing 3 different families. So it's not that much to keep track of. And it really is like a soap opera where you're jumping from one point of view to another. And he ends each one on a bit of a cliffhanger. So he's wrapped up some storylines for that family and you're ready to go on to the next family, but you still want to go back to family A because there's some things that are still left, hanging in the air. So it's a masterclass in writing and it really has been a fun read. Gail, what have you been consuming lately?
So I want to talk about a book. And it's strange because I don't, I have a policy. If I don't like a book, I don't talk about it. Writing's hard. We don't need to tear each other's work apart. But, I wanted to first of all ask, I don't know if you're one of the people who love this book, and made me think I was going to love this book, in which case we might have an on-air fight. But I have read On All Fours by Miranda July. Did you recommend this to me, Fiona?
I did. I'm sorry. I was the person who recommended it to you.
So people like Fiona, listeners, recommended this book to me, and I'm very obsessed with my own menopause, and this book is kind of menopausal, perimenopausal exploration is maybe the word I'm looking for. I don't know. I want to let every woman out there know this woman's menopause is not my menopause. I found her dislikable. I found her ridiculous. I found her menopause completely unrelatable. I found her sexual shenanigans just peculiar. I thought it was going to be shocking in a explicit way maybe, and that I'm okay with. But I just found it peculiar. Like I really found it deep, but not in a quirky, peculiar way, like just a peculiar, like pull yourself together for God's sake. I did like the decorating of the hotel room, but I also found that pull yourself together. That is a ridiculous thing to do. And menopause does not make people do such stupid, ridiculous things. So I did not enjoy it. It is not my menopause.
I distinctly remember saying at the time, I think on air, that this is a seriously unhinged book. It is nuts in a truly nutty, very, very weird way. And my one complaint about it is that it makes women seem to be these crazy, unhinged people who are absolutely at the mercy of their hormones. One hormone surge and you go off and do this completely mad thing. And that is a stereotype about women that, every month we swinging here and swinging there and we totally crazy and undependable creatures. It's not a stereotype about women that I like, and it's not one that I embrace. And I feel that she leans a bit into that.
Yes.
But I also think it's her truth in a way. I don't know to what extent this is her truth, but that kind of age 45 hormonal swing weirdness, I remember it going on inside my head. I like to think nobody else noticed it about me, but I do remember some craziness going on inside my head.
I definitely have never had that flavor of craziness going on in my head. I don't know if maybe I'm not claiming sanity at all, but
not
that
this exact
flavor of madness. And now perhaps everyone's going to have to read it because they want to know which side of this they fall on. But I think that stereotype for me was just too intense. The way she left her genderless child for that nonsense. Like, I really wanted to give her a smack. And I think that idea that a woman will go off on this nonsense, and sorry about the vagueness, but if you say the nonsense, you give away half the story. And would let their child be less well off as a result, because basically that child needs her at home, and is kind of waiting for her. And it would be one thing if she'd done what she said she was going to do, but to do what she did and leave her child at home, I don't think there are many women who would actually do that. I really don't, unless maybe I'm underestimating the madness of my fellow woman.
The thing is that she's meant to be going off to do something completely legitimate.
Yes.
So that time is blocked off anyway. And her husband, partner, is stepping in and taking care of the child. So it's allowed to her.
But
she's got this
extend
time.
it. She extends the
I read
madness.
it quite a while ago. I read it about a year ago.
She extends the madness.
Yeah, she does.
And she's very aware that the child needs her during that time.
Yeah. And yet men do this. I mean, men do this all the time.
This is true.
Push off to buy milk and don't come back, and
this is true.
Knowing their children need them.
This is true. Maybe it is an exploration of that, and maybe I need to explore that more. Maybe I need to go off and decorate a hotel room.
Yes. For a fortune of money.
Yes. Anyway, so that's been my reading week.
Okay, well, somebody who writes books that are considerably less unhinged than that is our guest today. Our guest today is Cliffordene Norton. Cliffordene is the author of 2 novels for young adults, Om jou te ken and Ek sal vir jou veg, both published by Pan Macmillan. Also a collection of short stories, Hartsmense, which was published by Viva Uitgewers, is that right?
That's correct.
And Cliffordene also writes reviews and columns for LitNet and has published multiple short stories in the magazine space, which is something I'm dying to hear about. So Cliffordene, hello, thank you for your time and welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Excited.
Cliffordene, I think you've listened to the pod, so you know what's coming. Yes. Tell us about your writing week.
When you guys invited me, I was like, I'm going to have a really, really great writing week to prepare for this. And that has not happened. So writing week has been a drop in the bucket, like a little small drop in the bucket. I wrote on Tuesday and then not written for the rest of the week because life got in the way. So writing has not been going well at this moment. Yeah, but that's how it's been going.
And when it's going well, what does it look like?
Oh, when it's going well, it's Monday to Thursday, at least 2 to 3 hours in the evening. Definitely a Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and then even Sunday mornings. So when it's going well, I actually don't want to be removed from the story. I am someone who loves the first draft very, very much. I love my first draft. It's like getting to know my world and getting to know my characters. And I'm like the only familiar person in that world. So it's like, it's a little piece of me in my world for a long time before I get to share it with anyone. So I love that.
Oh, that's lovely. I saw in an interview once that you said that you've been writing since you were very young and that you've been writing love stories by hand. So can you tell us a bit about your writing journey, like from your earliest memories of writing until you first got published?
Thank you. So I started writing when I was 15. So almost 20 years now. And I loved romances. I grew up in a house with a lot of books. I have a lot of readers around me. My grandmother was a reader, both my aunts, my mom, my uncle. But being an author was never a idea. So when I started writing, I literally started with my old school books, and I would start writing, and I would be like, oh yes, I love romances because it's just a happy ending and it's just that feeling. And I think I wrote like 4 romances by hand, and I still have those.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I really do still have them. And then my father was like, I think writing is not going to work. You need something that has an income. Yeah. And his and my mother's idea of income differed. My mother was like, follow anything you want, and you will make a success of it. And my father is like, no, stability. Look for engineering and look for a job where you will always have a career. And I'm like, I don't know. And then I went to study. When I started applying, I applied for journalism, because I watched Generations. I don't know. It was still the old school Generations. And there was HUISGENOOT Communications. And it was the first time I saw actually journalism as an option. And you would see the writing, and I love the chaos, and it looked very, very glamorous, which is not how it is in real life. So that's where I started. And then I
have to know, did your dad approve of that?
Not really. But I was like, I love my father. And I was like, but I can't live my life for him. Unfortunately, my mom is always like, you have your dad's stubbornness. And then my dad would be like, you have your mom's stubbornness. And then I'm like, I think I just got 2 portions and be grateful for it. So yeah, he was not a fan. He was still hoping until the very last time that I would do law or nursing was his sort of, he will accept it, but he's not really happy about it. And I went first marketing, and then I was like, marketing is not really what I want. I don't know why I went for marketing. And then I went into journalism, and I loved it. Even my friends were like, the first 6 months of university, you were hell to be around, because they were like, you were miserable. And the switch, because I was constantly the person who now went from, I hate classes and I am finding it really hard and it's very frustrating. And I failed for the first time. I failed the test, and that's something that's never happened in my life. To going from, oh my word, I love this. I want to explore this. I want to do more. And you had to take electives. And then one of the electives I could take was creative writing. And there was Prof. Francie Greiling and Prof. Hans. And I immediately started writing because I wrote what I saw. So I copied stories. And Prof. Francie was giving, and she was like, you have talent, but you are telling stories that's already been told. What is new? What is different? And that kind of gave me the permission to start writing stories from my background and my own community. And the first story I wrote was Getuienis van Bilo, which was my cousin, one of my cousins, the shortest and probably the most fierce, got in a car accident and he passed away. And he and the cousin, who's like my brother, had a very close relationship. So it went about that. And I got published, and I was like, oh, wow, this is a nice one. And that feeling has never went away, of just love seeing my published work, but even just love writing. Okay. I want to stop myself.
No, don't stop yourself. This is amazing.
Yeah. But after that, I actually did not love short stories. I was like, I want to be a novelist. I want to see my name on a book. And so I went through the rest of my studies, completing the short stories, but never falling in love with it. And then after I graduated, I was at home for December, and I don't know, I got a dream. And then I wrote my first short story. And I'm like, what can I do with this? And I sent it into Kuier, which is a Afrikaans magazine. And I was fully expecting them to be like, this is crap. Sorry for the word, but this is crap. We're not going to publish it. And they came back with feedback about, hey, it's too short and it just needs a better ending. And I rewrote it. And that process, that first short story, I fell in love with it. I was like, why did I hate this genre or this category while I was studying? Because it felt so natural to me. And I think that's kind of been an element of all my writing, even with writing youth novels. I never considered it. And immediately when Mimi asked me for 2 short stories or actually 1 short story for a youth novel and a youth collection anthology, and I was like,
and that's the children's publisher at Pan Macmillan.
Yes,
right.
Mimi Duplessis, who I love. But she was like, hey, would you mind sending me? And I was like, I can't write. And then I started writing, and I wrote 8 short stories for young adults, and then I cut it down and I sent in 2, and both of them got published. But it just felt so natural. It almost feels like coming home, and I think that's been a key element of all my writing. I always feel like if I didn't give it a chance and I gave it a chance, I come home to it. Yeah.
Let's talk about, because I think a lot of people don't understand this. What makes a story a young adult story as opposed to a children's story or an adult story? What is that young adult genre all about?
This is actually very interesting, because I think now that I'm doing my master, so I'm like, oh, am I going to say something against the canon? But they can forgive me. For me, what makes an adult story, number 1, is the character. The character's age is definitely young adult story is indicative of that, and their experience is very much part of that. And also the themes that are explored. I think for when I was lucky when I came into this quote unquote category, genre, whatever you call it, there was already a lot of work both in Afrikaans and English done. And it was also previous years that if you go back, especially in the Afrikaans language, you find that people were almost scared about talking about the hard topics. And then most recently, it's actually very, very common to see challenges and the realities of what young adults face. So for me, it's the character, usually about 15 to 18 years old, and they are literally between that in-between space. I'm not really a grown-up. I'm not really a child anymore. And then the other thing is their voice, making sure that their voice is, because you can write a story where it's a young protagonist, but the voice and the approach to it is very, very mature. And I think it's that sense of innocence, that sense of wonder, of discovering most things for the first time that really captures the essence of young adults.
And what draws you to that category of fiction? Why do you choose to write young adult?
Oh my God. I've wondered this a lot, and I think it's the fact that I can relate to the uncertainty of it. I think my perception of adult was like, there will once be, I will figure this out, right? Somewhere there will be a stage in my life where I'm an adult, I know what I'm doing, which both of you know doesn't happen.
We're still waiting for that.
We're older than you, and it's not coming.
Yes. So I was like, this still feels like I'm continuously figuring out shit.
You're allowed to swear.
Yeah, I would like, because I swear, I for 5 years I never swore, and these days I'm just like, I'm dropping it like diamonds around. But yeah, it's that uncertainty, and I also think that when you're I got a role. My cousin is here with me, and when I left, she was very, very young when I left for university, and I always kind of my mind has the divide of me until I lived in my family's home, and the me that left. And when I left, she was very, very young, and I would talk to her, but I would also treat her like a kid. And then COVID hit, and we started working from home. And at the end of that first year of COVID, my grandmother and my aunt got both sick. And I was one of the very privileged few of working from home. So all of my family was considered essential workers. They work in retail. So I could go home and look after them while she was going to school, because she was in a matric year. And I was surprised at how she has this sort of positive innocence, and she was wild, but she was also like wise. She's still, for me, one of the wisest people I know, and she's like 21. And I compared ours, and I was like, I felt like I was such a mess compared to her. But it gave me a respect for young people and what they are going through, because what I went through, and when I was growing up, we didn't have, social media was probably still present, but not as influential in my life. And now, and going through that, navigating through that, and then their world is a whole lot of drama. Teenage world is a whole lot of drama. And then adult world, where you're actually still a part of, because you still live with family, you still feel and experience what your parents or your aunts or your family is going through. So you're both in this two opposite worlds, and both of them has their dramas and both of them have their challenges. And you are not really welcomed in either one of them. When you're in the grown one, most people still consider you a child, and when you are in the adult one, in the young adult one or the teenage one, you are considered to be almost adult. So you're expected to have this responsibility, and I think that sort of in between space, that it's not even a golden compromise. It's more like just the messy side of two worlds colliding. I think that's a very interesting strip to work in.
I think that as English writers, Fiona and I, we have no grasp of the Afrikaans writing scene and how vibrant and active and busy and full it is. And I think often English readers also don't understand that. And I got a glimpse of it the other day. I was shortlisted for the Booksellers Award, which is kind of based on sales, and I was the only English writer on the list, because Afrikaans writing is so alive and healthy and selling. Can you tell us about that scene? Tell us about the Afrikaans writing scene.
Oh my word. So I used to be a publisher. I was working for a publishing house, Lapa Uitgewers, which is an Afrikaans publisher, and I worked in the romance genre. And one of the big things, we had a publisher and editor, as English will probably say, English people will know it, the editor in the publishing house, and she was Cecilia Brits. Now, she was a big deal in Afrikaans because she was actually the person that brought popular fiction back into Afrikaans, because for a long time, Afrikaans was very literary fiction, and also very, very protest fiction, protesting work. So we learned under her, me and Marlies, which we are both no longer in the publishing world, but she was my first mentor. And one of the key things when Cecilia met us the first time, and she was like, our biggest challenge is that we compete with English authors and English works, and Afrikaans is slowly dying. And this is been kind of a pervasive myth for a long time, that Afrikaans is dying, but it's actually not. I think you described it as vibrant, and it really is that. I do think Afrikaans is a very, very difficult language to write in, because especially as a colored person, because you, on the one hand side, it's the language you grew up with, and it's a language where a lot of you feel like, and there's actually research about it, where we were part of creating it, but it's also the language that was seen as the oppressor's language. And then whenever you talk, I have a lot of black friends who are English speaking, and they're like, do you feel conflicted about the language? I'm like, no, I'm not. I love it. I love it in the way, probably the way you would love your childhood home. It's something I'm very comfortable in, but I'm also very, very cautious about it, because I can't write standard Afrikaans, because it's not something I am comfortable with. It's not something that I feel my most earnest emotions in. And I've seen that has led, because you, in Afrikaans, there's sometimes this almost comparison about how standard Afrikaans is performing book-wise or selling-wise versus how, they call it streekstaal, or it's the Cape Afrikaans, Cape Malayan Afrikaans, or the Northern Cape Orange Afrikaans, or the Johannesburg Eldorado Park Afrikaans, how they are comparing and competing with one another. And I think I'm always like, you guys do know we are sitting at the same table because that is it. We are all, I don't think it's a competition. I'm really hoping that I'm actually seeing it, that we are coming together more and we're making space for one another and we're talking about things, because I would talk about my friends, and I was with, Wednesday evening. Yes, Wednesday I went with Didi Potgieter, which is a romance novel. And we always talk about story and structure. And when she's curious about something, she just asks. And I'm like, why is this obviously the history creates a bit of a cautiousness because you don't want to offend or hurt someone. But we just like, if we work together, it will be better than if we kind of all put those blocks between ourselves. Then I think it will be better for both the readers and for the authors. But that scene is very, very much alive. I always look at, I didn't bring the book, but I have authors that are just like, Safia Kaap is for me, oh my word, amazing. I'm like, how is this woman not internationally known? Because she's someone who has such amazing competence around her craft, but even her emotions. She loves writing women's stories. So I'm always like, oh my word, you should be like Jodi Picoult or something like that. And then I recently developed a love for poetry, and then Veronica Jafta's poetry, Soma Omi Bo. Am I pronouncing it right? No. But Veronica's poetry, I can see the front page now, but the title is escaping me, but it was beautiful. And then there's Lynthia Julius, and I love Lynthia's because Lynthia's poetry always feel like also coming home. She is from Namakwa descent, but she grew up in Kimberley, and I grew up in Berkeley West, which is literally next to Kimberley. So sometimes I would read a word or something from her poems, and I'm just like, I know that. We used to talk about it. So it's this kind of beautiful, I want to say, mosaic of Afrikaans that's coming out, and I really love it. I think I'm hoping we go from strength to strength in that regard.
So we've talked about the Afrikaans writers and poets who are working in the space, but let's also talk about the Afrikaans readers, because without them there would be no Afrikaans as a literature wouldn't exist. And we as English-speaking writers, we know that if we write a novel and it sells 1,000 copies, that's a bestseller. Everybody's really happy with that number. And that is why we can't compete with you Afrikaans writers in the Nielsen ratings, which is what that bookseller award that Gail was talking about is based on. So despite the fact that the numbers of people who can read and speak Afrikaans in South Africa are maybe not that high, they still show up for their writers. The readers show up for the writers. They buy the books, and they buy them at every level, from a child's picture book to a thriller for adults and everything in between, including your genre of books. So have you ever got to the bottom of why it is that Afrikaans readers will show up for their writers in such a great way?
No, I have not gotten to the bottom of it. I can definitely speculate based on experience previous years and everything when I talk to people. Popular fiction wasn't as available, I think, in previous years, and I'm talking about before I was born, I think 80s. And then it started showing up, and more authors started publishing in it. And I think there's still a hesitancy because Cecilia, who I talked about earlier, said we lost a lot of readers because there was not enough offerings available to them. And even in certain genres, that's still the same. Or like fantasy is almost like a little baby tree currently in Afrikaans and is beautifully blossoming and seeing it again. It's like, oh my word, thank you. I'm a fantasy reader as well, so it's very nice to see it. Sunil Kombrink gave out a series about Faye for the last 3 years, and it's been like one of the best sellers.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I think there was a hesitancy from the reader's side of trusting Afrikaans authors to be on the same level as English authors, because you guys you need to be at the top because you're competing in such a big, almost community of readers. You're competing with worldwide level. So there was this perception that English books automatically the top, and Afrikaans had to work. Authors and publishers had to work quite hard to be like, our books are just the same. But Cecilia said, just give them a sample and they will make up their mind. And when I started working, I was responsible for the social media marketing, and we saw that. We actually saw it in real time. When you publish a chapter or 2 chapters on social media, the book the sales of the book would skyrocket, and you would then be like, oh, because they were like, oh my word, I love this. And then we also started offering more genres, because first it was romance most popular, and romance is something that's kind of universal language for all readers. And then women's fiction and mustard foxy crime became very popular. And then everything from there, it's like when the authors started, because I know Isa Conrad started with romance and now she writes thriller. It's almost like when the authors saw, oh, our audience is showing up for them, they trying their hand at the different genres, and the readers respond. So yeah, definitely grateful for that.
And are those readers just responding to things that they love, or are they consciously working to keep their own language alive? In other words, buying books for their children so that their children read Afrikaans fiction, and the older children at the chapter book level and the teenagers at the young adult level. Is there a sort of conscious, almost political decision on the part of readers, or are they just buying things that they love?
I think it's a bit of both. When the children's books are actually the best sellers in Afrikaans, because parents would rather, when making a choice, would rather buy books for their children before they buy for themselves. But I also think it's hey, we need to fight to keep our language alive if we don't show up. And oftentimes you would see people on social media, when Media 24, News 24 became a subscription base, there was a huge controversy. And I remember it because I remember I was standing behind Marlies, who I mentioned earlier was my mentor, and reading over her shoulder the comments. And someone was like, hey, wait a minute. Someone wrote this post and they were like, you can't continuously ask us to fight for Afrikaans when you're not putting your money where your mouth is. And I think that tends to resonate a lot with people. It's like, my activism, my love, if I'm loving something, I think I need to contribute to it. So I think that's why Afrikaans should just to show up, yes.
And it's what you were saying about formal Afrikaans and informal Afrikaans, if that's how we want to label it, having to learn to work together. There's a much bigger picture. South African writers have to see ourselves as an entity. Maybe you've given us a whole new mission.
So Fiona and I know each other from, we went to Venezuela as ambassadors for the Fielven 2024 book festival. I think we became like family because we just had this great sense of humor. But that was something I was thinking the whole time. It's like, how do I not know? Because some of them, you know the name, but you don't know the author. You see the name in the books, bookshops, and you're like, oh, okay. And then when we met, I was like, oh, you guys are actually, English authors are struggling with the same challenges we are struggling with. Why aren't we working closer together? And there was mostly English authors, but some of them wrote English and then in their native language, which was absolutely beautiful. And then I'm like, yeah, it's for me very strange because South Africans can really come together for a sports game, or even sometimes when there's political conflict and it looks like every couple of years we all agree simultaneously that this is wrong. And then we can beautifully come together. Why are you not showing up for the arts and the literature? It's an interesting question. We definitely need to ask it more.
Very interesting.
I agree. I wanted to ask, because I know that there are people out there who would like to have your career as a writer for magazines. And I know that you have a short story in HUISGENOOT right now. And what advice would you give to a young author who wants to follow in your footsteps of having things accepted by magazines and regularly published by magazines? How should they do it? What should they be doing? Both in terms of picking a subject for a story and crafting that story, and also how to pitch to those publishers.
What's the story about a young author? To any author, Fiona, we want to know this.
Yes, we also want to know this.
Oh, wow. So my first advice would be reading. I always believe, Stephen King said it, if you can't be a reader, you can't be a writer. Mm-hmm. I think that is our biggest toolbox. So reading, if you are a magazine reader, because I actually, when I was a child, which is funny now that I think about it, that I didn't love short stories, but I used to tear out the short stories in HUISGENOOT, and there was Vrouwekeer, and even now with Kuier, I would tear out and paste them and go and reread them. So definitely read, and then read as much as possible. You can start like LitNet. You can publish with them. They unfortunately do not pay, but they do let you publish. And it's reading. There's a lot of, I think I have checked a long time ago, but I think there's like over 50 pages of like short stories and poetry in Afrikaans. So definitely read. And then the second thing is try. I think I remember when I was a young author, you are so scared to submit anything because you're like, oh my, what if someone laughs at you or just tells you you're horrible or your dream is crushed? Well, if you don't try, it's automatically no. So try. And in the crafting, always have a clear concept. I don't know if you know the short story. It's by Ling Ma. It's called Los Angeles. And she has, that short story taught me a lot about form and language. It's so beautiful because the inciting incident is halfway through the story, but the hook is so strong that I'm always like, oh my word, she got me. And she starts by describing the house, and at the end of the paragraph, she says, my 100 ex-boyfriends live with me. And you're immediately like, wait, what? So I think a strong hook is number one. A clear concept is number one. And number two. Number three is don't try, because I always see this when I'm reading because people like to ask me, hey, would you beta read or would you give me your opinion on this? And then they always try to almost have a summary paragraph at the end which explains the theme. And I'm like, no, your story already explored the theme in the work. Readers are smart. Please give them that grace to come to the conclusion themselves. So number three, make sure your ending is not a summary and make sure it is memorable. Yeah.
And which genres do well in magazines?
The magazines I publish in. So I'm hoping to dip my toe into the English writing because I'm reading and I see the competitions. That's another thing. On social media, there's a lot of short story competitions or submissions, ask for submissions opening. Each sort of English publication sometimes has a very strong focus, whether it is feminist, whether it is family. For the magazines I write for in Afrikaans, family is usually a very strong theme, which makes sense because most of them are family focused. But with Kuier, I sometimes feel like I can get away with more than I do with HUISGENOOT. Not that HUISGENOOT is a very strict and conservative, but I think they because it's a family magazine, they kind of play it safe a bit. But I've also asked them sometimes, hey, would you look at this? Because I've built a relationship with Laura now. And I'm like, hey, would you look at this? And she would be like, yes or no. Or I wrote a story last year, which she accepted but haven't published yet because she says she's waiting for the right time. And I was like, there's no way she's going to publish this because it goes about abuse. And that is not something you really would want in a magazine that your children might also pick up and read. And she was like, no, we will, because it's a long one and she doesn't want to cut it. Mm-hmm. So she needs to work around the contents of the magazine each time. And then she's like, sorry, Cliffordene, not yet. But I'm like, no, I'll wait, because I'm just so in awe that she's willing to take a chance on you. And then I would say, if you are a short story author, you want to try, always have a backup short story, because sometimes, especially when you're building a relationship with them, they were like, hey, we have this theme, or we have this, do you possibly have a short story for me? And then I'm like, oh, here's one. And it just helps, because as much as they give you an opportunity, you want to build reciprocity with them and be like, hey, as much as you guys have meant to me, because you're still getting paid and you're still getting that recognition. But it's just something nice to be like, oh, I could help you the way you've helped me, in that sense. Yeah.
And you just mentioned in talking about this that it was a long one. Tell us what the length of a short story should be.
So in Afrikaans, it's usually about, the shortest one is Kuier. Kuier is 1,200 to 2,000 words. HUISGENOOT is 1,500 words. The short story competition, so we have the Afrikaans Festival Woordfees, or Toyota Woordfees. Mm-hmm. And they are usually like 3,000. So definitely shorter than English fiction would consider short stories, because we do have that guideline of, anything to 1,000, from 1,500 to 10,000 words would be considered a short story. But this is one sitting reads that we want to inspire. So usually between 1,500 to 3,000 would be considered. Yeah.
And when it comes to publishing a collection of your short stories, at what point does one start thinking, I've got a collection now and I can think about pitching this as something that can be published?
So they want original short stories. And a guideline is usually a very, very strong concept. If all of the short stories play around at least one or two similar concepts, then I think, I would say, if you are trying to put together a short story collection, start when you have, I would say, 50. It's a big number.
It is.
Or let me make it more digestible. Let's say 30, because then you yourself can cut down a bit. Because a couple of years back, there was a beautiful short story a short story collection anthology that literally had 13 short stories. And it felt like the 13 best short stories that author has ever written. And that's kind of been my guideline. If it's good, if I feel proud of it, because we all know we have this internal sense as authors that goes like, hey, this is good, or no, you can definitely do better. And sometimes that doesn't work because you're on deadline. But if you're starting, put your best foot forward. You want to make an impression in both the readers and the publishers.
You, in one of your blogs, I went down a huge rabbit hole.
Now I feel bad I abandoned it.
You can always go back. But you wrote an article about using ChatGPT, and you said some things that a lot of people would find very controversial. Can you tell us what your view of the use of AI and ChatGPT is?
When ChatGPT launched, my phone blew up. Everyone was like, oh my word, our careers are over. Yeah. And my finance, I'm a member of like this finance club thing, and he tends to give advice, and he was like, you need to start pivoting your career. And I'm like, that's not something I want to hear about someone who manages my money. But I remember the December, and it was just hysterics, and everyone was running around, and I was strangely calm, because I'm like, why are you guys panicking about this? But my view is, AI will never replace a human. When the sex strike went on in America, one of the writers held up a poster, and it said, ChatGPT doesn't have childhood trauma. And I think that's the essence of it. Yes, they can simulate human intelligence, but it's very, very difficult, because you as a human, you are perfect in the fact that every time you're going out, you are taking in, even subconsciously taking in different things, and taking in different moments, and taking in different experiences. And AI can only learn in a very simulated, closed off of environment about it. And AI is in a very closed off environment learning about it. So they are getting, number one, the experience secondhand, which I think is where authors will win. I mean, they experience the emotions, the strongest emotions, sometimes even the most subtlest emotions. That's why I'm like, no, I rather use it as an ally, as where you're treating it as an enemy. And I use it as my first beta reader or developmental editor. I would, well, before now, I need to pay for it, because I haven't done it since the user terms or user agreements changed. Because before that, you can be like, please don't learn from this. And the user agreement stated you couldn't learn from it. But now they make it very prominently, hey, we are learning from this. So I haven't put in my writing yet. I know with the paid version, you can actually opt out of that. So, but I would be like, oh, I'm struggling with maybe one thing I'm always struggling with is the setting. I'm struggling with the setting. And then I would be like, I've read this and this, because I always try to credit, I've read this by this blog, I've read this by this blog. What would your advice be? I literally talked to it, because I asked it once, hey, chat, what would your name be? And they were like, Alex. And I was like, why Alex? Because it can be Alexander or Alexandra. And I'm like, okay, Alex. So I literally chat to it like you would a friend. And then sometimes I would like, hey, please explain this to me. Or it's literally sometimes a brainstorming session, but it's a brainstorming session. Instead of you and the paper and a very inanimate object, it's something that can talk back. And I love that feature about it, because it almost shows you or forces you to think differently, because it's more often than not, it gives the most common answers. And then you're like, no, I don't want that. No. Okay, now I need to go think something else. Because when we are writing, when you're drafting, you always want to be like, I know, I want to get to the world so fast that sometimes I want to be like, can I just put in here a short little thing? But my process can't work of moving forward without completing that sentence. It's almost like my brain is like a chain, and if one of the little kinkles fall down, I can't continue. So when I look at ChatGPT and it gives me all the options, I'm like, this is not original. What I'm writing here is not original. So it makes me very critical about my work, and I love that.
Sure. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Yeah. You've just opened up a whole new way for us to think about this thing as a tool rather than a threat.
Except I think what you say, very important, the paid version is now the one where you can stop it learning. And that's really important for writers. You don't want it learning your words.
Yeah.
Cliffordene, I wanted to ask you about research and how you conduct your own research, because your one novel, Axel vir jou veg, is set in the world of illegal fight clubs. And I'm not sure if you had personal experience of that world and were able to draw on that, or if you conducted research. And if you did, I'd love to know how, and also how in general you conduct your research and how you'd advise starting out writers to do that.
So I am not of that world. I really wish that I was. When I start, so my writing process is I create the story from first draft to first sentence to finished draft, and then I let it go. And it's all organically. I never write via structure. And then I go afterwards and go like, ooh, I need research for this. I'm lying through my teeth here. So with S05 that book is almost 99% the way, the plot line, the ending changed. And when I wrote this, I'm like, I know nothing about street fighting. And then I started doing research and I came across a couple of articles. And one of the most interesting articles I came across was actually a Media 24 article that talked about this guy who takes young people from Eldorado Park, from what you would be quote-unquote locations, and teaches them to fight because it takes them off the street. And I thought, oh my word, that's such an interesting concept, because he got backlash because he's teaching people how to fight, or young people how to fight. And he was like, no, this is the reasons for it. So that article inspired a lot of it. And then I needed to find out how Taekwondo worked because one of my friends in varsity used to do karate, but I don't know anything about karate except the movies. So I went and I read, and you learned about what does each belt mean, and when do you get your belt, and how long it would you get. And obviously Kesley's journey sped up quite a lot because I was like, you can't take 2 years before you get a belt, or you can't train 2 years before you get this belt. So a lot of research about it, and then looking at the kicks, looking at the reading about what does the specific kick mean, how would you enable it, how would you portray it, and then a lot of YouTube videos was with that one. I did not go to a dojo, which I'm so, and right now I'm like, yeah, I should have gone. Because now I'm like, I recently wrote a short story and I need to go talk to a policeman because one of the secondary characters is a policeman, or not a big role, but it is, her father is a policeman. So now I'm like, no, go talk to them, because I've written emails because I don't want to just show up, but I'm like, well, I'm not getting feedback. I'm going to show up one of these days, to our local police station. So I think, yes, one of my biggest regrets is literally not going physically. Now that I want to translate S05, my goal is actually to take a couple of months classes before doing it. So,
nice.
Yeah. But research-wise, if you can do it in person, definitely do it. First-hand experience is the best. Yeah. Unless you need to kill someone, then maybe not. Yeah.
Cliffordene, these days, the job isn't over when one writes the end and sends it off for publication. The author is expected to take an active role in marketing the book, and some of us are better at it than others. And I've noticed that you have embraced TikTok as a way of promoting your books, and that you also are very up on like the latest TikTok trend. You'll jump on it. You'll create a reel to trend. How's that working out for you? And was it an easy pivot for you to make, to start doing this kind of marketing?
Oh, can I answer the second one first? It wasn't easy. Most authors I know are very introverted. Yes. We prefer our little safe space in the world. So this wasn't easy. But I knew and kind of understood the importance of authors promoting themselves. I worked in publishing, and one of the things we struggled a lot with getting some of the authors to understand. The readers don't want to hear from the publisher. They don't really care about us. We're just a platform. They want to hear from the author. So when I started writing, I was like, I can't go around my own advice because I've said it to many people, which adds a element of accountability. You're like, I can't chicken out now because I said it to other people. When I started, I was like, oh, I really love YouTube and I really love vlogs and I really love that type of content. And every time I post, or every couple of months, there's someone on TikTok offering me their services, how they can better improve my social media. And I was like, I really don't want to create a perception about myself that's not out there. I am a homebody. I'm mostly with my dogs. I'm mostly at my house in a corner writing. That is my reality. I can't be going to bookstores. I go to coffee shops. That's the word I was looking for. I can't go to coffee shops and pretend I'm writing all the time because I get distracted in coffee shops. I watch people. I listen to their stories. I am siloed, but also very engaged in my own little space. I have a corner sectional. In that corner, it's me, and I'm very engaged in the story. So when I embraced TikTok, I was like, create something for you that feels true to you. And number one, for me, it's almost like a diary that I can look back on, because sometimes I go back and I'm like, oh, that happened. And it's a very nice capsule. Success-wise, it has gone quote-unquote viral. I don't know what is viral numbers, but there are a few with more than others. But a friend of mine, Didi, that I mentioned, she got once like 100,000 views for her TikTok. And I was like, that is so cool, but that is not what I want. My greatest hope is that people start engaging. And I recently started seeing, I'm busy 2 years now with this, and I recently see more than just my family. People are actually started engaging in the comments, and that was for me success. So yeah, that's how I use social media.
Brilliant.
Very interesting. Okay, so I've mentioned I went down the rabbit hole of your blog. Another one that I found very interesting, and it's something we've touched on with various writers, is that you wrote a blog on why works by women of color are always seen through a political lens. And you've also spoken about how what has caused the resurgence of Afrikaans literature is the different genres, that are moving away from the protest literature towards just writing books.
Yeah.
How do you marry those two pressures?
2 years ago, I read a Dutch article, and one of the professors was like, the biggest complaint they have is that students come, especially black students come, and be like, hey, why is my work always seen through a political lens? And until then, I realized I've seen it in South Africa, and I've seen it. But you kind of sometimes don't think it's bigger than you are, or bigger than your little environment is, which is, we can have lots of topics or comments about that. But I saw it and I was like, yeah, it's very, very difficult, because, Prof. Barbara, she was also here with Disgrace and the comrade's wife. And I interviewed her once for LitNet, and she said, and I was like, how do you, and she's like, I actually don't focus on not writing or not making, I'm writing the story. And someone very similar, Ansel Coulson, also said for me, because some of her covers are white women, and I'm like, you're a woman of color, does it disturb you? And she says, that's not my first thought. My first thought is it a good story? Mm-hmm. And I don't really care how it is portrayed. But recently, I have another book in the works, and the cover, the front page came and said, and my cousin said, I love the fact that all your books represent colored people, people of color. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm a person of color. I immediately assumed. And she's like, no, I know sometimes people would choose not to do that because of that lens. I mean, we are all women here. We know automatically our bodies, our beings is a debate, number one. Whether we want to come to that discussion or not, you are automatically discussed. And especially now with what's happening in America and seeing the horror show that's going on that side.
Let's not talk about that.
Please don't. But watching it now and the fear, sometimes we are like, will it happen here? I'm like, no, South African women are very strong. But there is always kind of a debate about women. And you said it beautifully in Venezuela. I asked you, how do you sometimes, Fiona, how do you sometimes marry the fact that women are sometimes the very foundation that upholds patriarchy? And you said, I never try to judge my characters. I just try to give them an opportunity to love, something along those lines. And that also changed how I view it. But as a colored woman and as a colored person, number one, and as a woman, number two, those are very two identities that was suppressed. So even when I am not trying to be political or trying to make a political statement, people will take that from it, will garner from it, will extract meaning from it. And I'm realizing I need to start being okay with that because I want to tell the stories that I want to tell. And I'm in the very privileged position of just writing what I love first. And luckily, this is not my full income. So I have a full-time job. So I can write without being scared of offending someone. I am still, because not of the offending someone, but of hurting someone unintentionally. I don't think any human wants to do that. But I write the stories I write. And I always say my first sort of rule for myself is be true to the character. I am true to the character on what her goals are, what she's living through. There's the first point of integrity for me. She needs to be good. They need to be good. He needs to be good. Anything else I can adjust. I can adjust the story, the setting. I can work on my craft. But if my character is not happy, then I can't continue with the story because I don't love it. And once it's out there, I'm one part of it, the reader is one part of it, and they are allowed to grasp whatever meaning they get from it. So I need to let it go. But it is sometimes still, I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. And then I'm like, okay, rewire the brain, let it go. That's what they are getting from it. And hopefully it's something they feel at least comfortable with.
I'm someone who has written in the young adult space, and it doesn't do very well in English language in South Africa unless you get prescribed for schools. So as a young adult author, one's always got at the back of your mind, this could be prescribed. And then that kind of gets in your head and affects the story that you're creating. You're thinking, oh, no, I can't really go there. That'll reduce the chances of it being prescribed. And maybe I should lean more into this. And it can actually mess up your story a bit. Is that something you ever have in mind when you're writing?
No. So I like English in Afrikaans. It's even the pressure to be subscribed to schools because I'm not going to name names, but I know of a person who sold like 70,000 copies. So it financially, what it means for your career, the recognition around it, being prescribed to school is a great one. And I do know that the publishing house tends to look at it. But for me, I'm like, I would rather my book be a little cult classic. And the people who read it find themselves there, then I have some literary message or lesson that can be taught. But I have to say this. One of my favorite book, not one of my favorite book is Dikkie van die Kaap. And it was a Cape Malayan book, with Islamic faith. And that book we read in grade 6, so grade 11, standard 6, grade 11. And it was the first time I saw not just me as a reader, because but my whole class, we were 32, come alive with love, because the story was not about a lesson. The story was about characters that felt very familiar. You could have literally taken the same story and placed it in our little community, and it would have the same impact, because in the book they describe the Owens on the hook, whose story it is. So the boys on the corner, and the boys on the corner was my cousins. So in front of the creche, they would sit on that little corner. It's the creche and the church is next to each other, and there's a tree, and that would be their hangout spot. So when I read that book, I visualized it. So I'm hoping that with time we just don't cut off as a community, as South Africans, we just don't cut off the books that are a little out of the way, because I think sometimes more people than not relate to that than you would expect. Did you guys watch Encanto?
No, my children have told me repeatedly to watch it, and I haven't.
Yeah, so in Encanto, there's 2 sisters. There's 3 sisters, but the oldest is the strongest, the middle is the most beautiful, and then obviously the youngest. But it was very funny to read an article afterwards that Disney created more dolls of the middle, the most beautiful character. And the children were like, no, we want the oldest. We want the strong one. So I think that sometimes I'm always like, just give some books a chance. And it doesn't have to necessarily be mine, but just give some authors, because some authors can write and you're like, oh my word, I can't relate to this, but I can relate to it. I'm literally in it, part of the world, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
So speaking of things that you've been reading, what have you been reading or listening to or watching lately that's made an impression on you?
Oh, this I knew would be my easiest one. I'm reading 1,000 Eyes by Mia Aronson. And I'm also reading, so I get in a slump, and where I don't want to read new books and I only reread. And last year I was a judge for competition, so we had 2.5 months to read 47 books.
Jesus.
And then to the rest of the year, I just read so many new books, and I was like, oh. And this year it's like, wait, I actually want to go back to the comfort ones. So I've been rereading. So Mia Aronson is the one I'm currently reading, and I'm loving. Mostly because of the language, because it sounds like an English South African person in a way that not many books do. You hear the sort of South African slang coming through, the lekker and the now and so it's very fun. And then I'm reading Man of Measure, which is a Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy fan fiction. And it is, I'm like, how is this book 500,000 words? And I've reread it. This is now the 5th time. So I discovered it last year. Yes. Yes. And what I've been listening to. So, I did not love Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. I don't know if you guys know it, but it's a song. It's a diss track. Because I didn't like it, because I didn't like the diss track. And then I got into it. My cousin and I went to it's a chill out spot, but they had different DJs coming to play. And I think that was one of the ones I was like, no, I hate the song. And then my cousin is just like, just listen to it. And I listened to it and the beat got me. Mm-hmm. And, I fell down the rabbit hole. And then in that same time, Kendrick performed at the Super Bowl. And I went down and I fell in love with his music. I am so, because I love rappers. My favorite is probably Tupac and then Eminem. And now number 3 is Kendrick, because they all have this very storytelling sort of element to their writing. And Tuesday, he dropped an album, and I've been listening to it, and Luther has been my favorite because it's giving, a 90s R&B, it's giving love stories, and it's just so beautiful. And then I got to Reincarnated, which he also dropped. And I grew up with Tupac, and the first part of it is Spanish singing, which took me back for other reasons, but then the beat starts, and it's like hearing Tupac for the first time because you know Tupac's music and you hear it, but there's something when it feels new, like you're hearing him for the first time again since he's passed away. And I got emotional because I was at work and I was listening to the song, and I'm like, I need to take a moment because I'm going to cry literally right here. But it was like hearing him for the first time again, and I fell in love with Kendrick Lamar. So that's what I've been reading and listening to. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Cliffordene, we hope that everyone checks out your backlist and that everyone goes and buys HUISGENOOT to see your short story. And we're looking forward to the next one. It sounds like it's well underway if you're already seeing covers for it. So that'll be great. Have you got a publication date for that? Can you tell us a title yet?
Title not yet, because I had a title and then my publisher had a title, and my cousin loves my title, my cousin and my mom, and they tend to have more influence on me than they should. And me and my publisher's been going like, hey, yes, no, so not yet. But our publication date, it's set for June so far, and here's hoping. No extensions, but hopefully it will get right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that's something for all the readers to look forward to. Cliffordene, thank you so much for coming in today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been so inspiring.
Thank you for having me. This was actually a lot more chill than I expected because it's just like chilling, but thank you so much.
Gail, I felt as though we could have carried on talking to Cliffordene forever. I know we both had questions that we still wanted to ask her, but we ran out of time.
It was the most remarkable experience, and everything she said was so interesting and led to another thought.
And what did you get from Cliffordene in particular?
Okay, so quite a lot, but what I love is the sentence I've written down that she said, that was, give your readers the grace to come to the conclusion by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that's an important lesson. She was talking about short stories and not having a summary at the end, but I think it's something in all our writing. You don't have to spell everything out. Your readers have got perfectly good brains.
Mm-hmm.
They can put together what's happened. They can see the symbolism. They can make the conclusion. They can learn the lesson without having it shoved down their throats. And there's nothing worse as a reader than having the thing shoved down your throat when you've already got there on your own. So I think that's a really important lesson.
It's something we were taught at school, wasn't it? That every essay has to have a conclusion paragraph.
Yes.
And kids are still being taught that to this day.
And bring it all together in your conclusion paragraph. And yes, for academic writing.
Mm.
And yes, for maybe a thought piece. Maybe you want to, with a thought piece, end with what your thought is in summary. But not for fiction.
Mm. No, I agree.
What about you, Fiona? What did you get out of that?
Well, I was fascinated by what she said about when one's putting together a collection of any kind, that you should have lots of material for it. And also, when you are submitting to magazines, make sure you have a story in reserve, because they might say something like, well, this one isn't right for us, but what else have you got? And you don't want to have to go away for a month and write the what else.
Yeah.
If you've got it in your back pocket, so to speak, you can say, well, I've got this, I've got a story on this theme. Would you rather publish that? And it sounds like very often they say, yes, we would. So just that value of having stuff in reserve, material in your bottom drawer, something that you can pull on. Is it have you ever worked like that?
It's, you know what, I also was fascinated by it, but it also made me need a little lie down. Because the idea of having, you know, I'm very lazy, so I like my work to work hard for itself. And the idea of having this drawer full of stories or drive full of stories that might never come to anything, but might be the backup and all that work. And like I'm even talking about it now is making me feel a bit anxious. But I do think there is value in it, and in the short story space. I definitely think there's something in it, and that maybe if we want to enter the short story space, we've got to think about that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something to think about, because I don't think you become a millionaire, but I think it can be quite a nice living for you if you're regularly getting published in magazines, places that pay for short stories. I think that can supplement your income quite nicely.
Fiona, there's something else she said that I want to ask you about. She talked about writing her first stories by hand. And I had quite a overwhelming physical memory of my early writing years. And I wanted to know, how did you start writing stories?
When I was very, very young, certainly by hand. For years and years and years, I wrote by hand. And I still have some of them. I still have some of that, you know, blue, big ballpoint pen, written out stories. You look at them now and you feel a bit of nostalgia and a little bit of cringe. And did it slow down one's pace of thinking to be writing something out by hand? And then I think of authors like Margie Orford, who still does her first draft by hand. And who else was it? Ivan Vladislavich, I think, who said.
Yeah. And I listened to somebody, but I'm never going to remember, but someone big international who still does a lot by hand. So I wrote when I was very little as well, by hand, and weirdly, I remember onto letter writing paper. So I had like this letter writing pad with stories and the paper was blue. So I had that very physical memory. But the thing that got me into writing was trying to learn to type on a typewriter. And there was something about that process that made me very creative. And I wrote these very funny stories that I would share with my parents. That was me playing around with the typewriter. Yeah. And I mean, that's not something any young writer's going to do these days. I think you'd struggle to find a typewriter to do that on. And it was a big part of my coming to writing. But I have to say, if there weren't laptops, I don't think I'd be a writer. Far too lazy to retype anything.
Yeah, never mind rewrite it by hand. Yeah, oh, my gosh.
Never.
So if you have read Cliffordene Norton's books, if you are ambitious for writing in the young adult space, or if you have experience of submitting to magazines, please get in touch. We'd love to hear about it. We're on all social media across the board, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.